right, welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Cleary, and I want to give a quick introduction to Sasha. I wish I could say that I've known Sasha since preschool, but that's not quite true. We met when our kids went to the same preschool, and I got to know Sasha first as a great dad and friend long before I came to learn that he was, as my wife calls him, a real-life superhero. Sasha's the founder and director of RefugePoint, a humanitarian organization that finds lasting solutions for refugees in life-threatening situations. He's also the author of the book From Crisis to Calling that he's here today to tell us about. When I read this book, I was struck by how big of a story this is and how desperate the circumstances are for the refugees in the Congo and all around the world, especially as compared to my comparatively safe and comfortable life. But it would be a mistake to only think of this as someone else's story. For one, we're all guaranteed a certain number of personal crises in life, and there are lessons from the book that can serve as guideposts for when we are confronted by the unexpected or the unfair. And second, Sasha's work is an inspiration for anyone who wants to help and do something that's bigger than yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Jeff, thank you for inviting me here and for that lovely introduction. It is a real pleasure to be here, to be able to talk about the book that I co-authored with my dad, David Chanoff, From Crisis to Calling. Thanks, Tiffany, for being here, Ryan, and everybody else. Right now, there are about 65 million people displaced because of war and conflict in the world. And the average amount of time someone lives as a refugee is nearing 20 years. Congo is one of the places that has been in conflict for about 20 years now. And many years ago, in 1998, when the conflict reemerged there, the US government, I think out of guilt over not acting during the Rwandan genocide, engaged the organization that I was working for at the time, the International Organization for Migration, to send small rescue teams into the Congo and evacuate people from that country who were being attacked. And those people all eventually came to the US through our government's resettlement program. My boss, David, handed me a list with 112 names on it and sent me in on the last rescue mission. And he told me that your goal is to get these 112 people out. They are in a safe, protected center with armed guards around it near the capital of Congo. You'll go in there, you'll get them to the airport, and you'll fly them out. You'll need armed guards to do this because Congo is at war, and people who look like Tutsis are being attacked in the streets. So you'll have to protect them getting to the airport. But we've managed to get over 1,000 people out, almost 1,500 people out, and these are the last 112 that the Congolese government has given us permission to go and get. And he said, I'm sending my right-hand person in with you. She's been on every previous evacuation with me, but she sometimes tries to take additional people, so you have to stop her. So he put that responsibility on me to kind of make sure that we only got those 112 people out. And then when we got into that safe haven, we registered those 112 people, but we were pointed to a tent. And I remember stepping into that tent, and we saw these 32 widows and orphans in that tent. When Sheikha leaned over to a little girl holding a doll and said, "What's your doll's name?" and the doll's eyes popped open, and all of a sudden we realized that it was a tiny infant that looked more dead than alive. It was clear the hardship and horror that these people had gone through. Mammy was a 15-year-old girl in there who had watched many of her relatives pass away in the past year and a half that she'd been in prison and in danger, and she was one of the other people in that safe haven. So Sheikha and I left, and she said, "We have to take them." And I said, "We can't." And I tried to make sure that I was doing what my boss wanted me to do and what I had been told I had to do. But I wanted to take them. And Sheikha finally said to me, "Sasha, we're humanitarians. If we don't do this, nobody will. This decision is up to us." And what she really did was she connected me with my own deepest sense of who I felt I was. And and what I wanted to do, my own sense of kind of compassion and empathy. And so we called our boss and told him that we wanted to try to take them, and he got very upset with us, and he explained that we would probably fail and that everybody would lose their lives. But I said, I understand this. When he said that, I said, we have to try anyway. So we managed, after a lot of complexity, to get everybody to the airport with our armed guards on the morning of the last evacuation, and then the Congolese officials stopped us from getting on the plane. And my heart stopped, and I thought, everything that my boss, David, has warned us about is coming true now. But Chika went over and started talking to the head of Congolese immigration, and about a minute later, they let us all board the plane. And we flew out to a refugee camp in a neighboring country, Cameroon. And from there, those people went through the US resettlement process and then came to the US. And I've watched them all rebuild their lives here. I've known Mammy now for almost 20 years. So that experience opened my eyes to people who were in the most life-threatening situations and off the radar. Everywhere I went, working across Africa, I found people who were kind of unseen and in danger. When I went to Kakuma refugee camp, I worked with a group called the Sudanese Lost Boys. They've become kind of famous here in the US. There was a movie called The Good Lie that Warner Brothers did with Reese Witherspoon about their story, and 60 Minutes did a piece about them. But I saw that while all these young children who'd survived horrors in Sudan, all these boys and young men were coming to the US, girls were overlooked in that camp. And everywhere I went, I saw people who were overlooked. I also saw that the US resettlement program is one of about 30 countries worldwide that actively brings refugees here, and they have a pathway to citizenship. And this is one of the 3 solutions for refugees right now in the world. Essentially what happens is when you flee your home, you're either going to go back home, or you're going to stay in the country to which you fled, or you're going to resettle to another country. So those are the 3 different options. The problem is that people don't go home anymore. The average amount of time, as I said, is 20 years before people return home. The other problem is that a lot of people are just stuck in refugee camps in neighboring countries where they get food year after year after year, but there's no hope for anything better than that. And so actually, one of the reasons we've heard so much about the global refugee crisis right now is because so many Syrians and others were trying to get into Europe. And what happened there was that the international community has simply run out of humanitarian aid money. Food was cut off to about 800,000 Syrians about a year ago. So people were faced with the prospect of watching their children starve and having no access to education, and they were forced into dangerous onward journeys. People are forced to risk their lives to try to get to someplace better. So I saw that there could be more opportunities for resettlement, and that there could be more opportunities to figure out how to help people become self-reliant if they can't resettle. And that's why I started this organization, RefugePoint. So I started it about 10 years ago, and it was exciting because I met a lot of people just like you here in this audience who are interested in these issues but maybe didn't know a ton about them. And I said, I know a lot of people right now who are in life-threatening danger, and if you can support what I'm doing, starting this organization, we can get them to the US or Canada or Australia where they can rebuild their lives. And for those people who might be able to stay in the neighboring country, we can try to help them become self-reliant there so that they can stay there and have a normal life there and get their kids into school. So RefugePoint now is an organization that looks for solutions to refugee problems, which is very different than the whole international aid community, which is primarily focused on giving aid year after year after year with food and other services while they wait for refugees to be able to go home. So what we want to do and what we've tried to do is help reshape how people think about refugees. They're not just victims, they're people who can contribute, who, when they have opportunities, can actually support themselves, contribute to their communities. And what I've found personally is that they inspire those who know them. I have been incredibly inspired by the people I have met who've come through the worst horror and hardship and then go on to rebuild their lives. Mammy, whom you met, works at a foundation in Phoenix where she's helping other people. And I've met so many refugees who go on to contribute when they just have an opportunity. So RefugePoint is focused on making sure that refugees have opportunities. And it's been really exciting to build this organization over the past 10 years. But ever since that experience in the Congo that really changed how I thought about my life and what I wanted to do. So in the Congo, I was communicating with my parents. I was worried that they would be worried about me because this was a new experience for me, but it was also a new experience for them having a son who was in a place where there was a lot of danger. And so my mom is from Finland, and the Congolese government had bugged our room and was trying to listen in on what we were doing and understand more about what we were doing. And I was worried that they had bugged my email too. But I wanted to send emails to my parents. So I sent them some emails in my mom's native language, which is Finnish, which I also learned growing up, thinking that even if they're bugging my emails, they're not going to read Finnish. But from that point, I started talking to my mom and dad about this experience, and I started talking to my dad specifically over many years about what it meant to me. And that led to thinking about what critical decision points can mean for other people. That led to this book. So the book is called From Crisis to Calling, Finding Your Moral Center in the Toughest Decisions. And it uses this story of this rescue operation to talk about moral decision points that people face. But what I realized, and what the publisher, Barrett Kohler, saw, was that while my situation was unique, the fact is that we will all be confronted at one time or another with some kind of decision that's going to impact other people in some way. It might not be obviously as kind of specific and dramatic as what I went through, but that we're all at times, either in our families or in our work lives or with what we're doing or what we're seeing, we might be confronted with a decision that's hard and might take us out of our comfort zone. But these kind of decision points I have seen and others have seen are opportunities to actually understand yourself more. And they're opportunities to move in a direction of your life that is more in line with your own sense of compassion and your own sense of empathy. And when you do that, I think you connect more with who you really are. So in the book, we lay out 5 ideas or kind of principles that help people to that help think about this. The first one is to be prepared, to know that at some point you're going to face some sort of decision that might impact other people in some way, and know that that'll happen. And the second point is to open your eyes. Open your eyes to what that decision is. For me, opening my eyes was actually stepping into that tent. When I stepped into that tent, I saw those people face to face. And when I saw them face to face, that was when it really struck me that this is not just about them, it's about me and my decision. So I think that it's really easy to stay, we're all busy in our lives, right? Everyone here is, you're doing amazing, a million things and probably multitasking all the time. But we're busy with our work, we're busy with our families, we're busy with all the things in our life. It's easy to keep your focus on that and not look up and open your eyes to some hard decision that's around you. The third principle that we lay out is to confront yourself, or have somebody argue with you, or understand what you're looking at and think about it. For me, even though I opened my eyes to those people, I still didn't want to help them because I had orders from my boss. There was a lot at risk. I knew that we were potentially risking other people's lives. I was really lucky to have Sheikha there, whom you saw in the video, is just this extraordinary human being with incredible passion, but she was the one who argued with me. And I realized that having that confrontation made me think about who I was. My own family came here to the US as refugees 100 years ago, fleeing anti-Semitism. And I thought about my great-grandmother who raised 4 kids on her own, but arguing with Sheikha helped me figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. So the fourth principle is to know yourself. Figure out what's in your family background, what experiences have you had, what is your heart and your sense of empathy telling you what to do. And then but even with all those things, I was still really scared. So the 5th principle that we lay out is to take courage. I was really lucky again because I had this extraordinary person with me. But I would say it was a courageous thing to try to decide to take them. And Sheikha led the way on that because we were going against our orders. We'd been told not to do that. And there was a lot of risk. We had to double our armed guard to try to get those people out because Congo was at war and it was complicated. But so not all those principles will necessarily come into play with every decision, but we find that that's a good framework to help think about these things. And we bring in a lot of other stories in the book about other people who have faced critical decision points, people from the military, people who've worked in healthcare, and in many different areas of life to show that this is not a unique situation, that this is actually common to face decision points. But some of these decision points can actually help us define who we are. So but the fact is that we have a lot of different influences in our lives that are shaping us and telling us to do different things. And so there's this great quote that we found from the sociologist James Q. Wilson. And it's about the sense of empathy and the moral sense. And the quote is that humankind's moral sense is not a strong beacon light. It is rather a small candle flame, flickering and sputtering in the strong winds of power and passion, greed and ideology. But brought close to the heart and cupped in one's hands, it dispels the darkness and warms the soul. And so the book has gotten some good attention because I think that it can help people to think about decisions that you might have in front of you or things that you want to do which might orient you in a way that will connect with your own sense of compassion and empathy, and that those things are really core human characteristics, and that when we do that, we feel more fulfilled in our lives. There's the guy who was Martin Luther King Jr.'s spiritual mentor is a guy named Benjamin Mays, and he was also at Morehouse College, and he challenged his students saying, each of us is born to do something unique. What is it that you were born to do? And I think that confronting hard decision points is one way to try to help figure out what we are each here uniquely suited to do, because I think everybody has things to contribute to the world that can improve the world in one way or another. And so I hope that this book, From Crisis to Calling, can help in some way to shape people and get people thinking about the fact that we each have unique contributions to make in the world. I also hope that it can help shed light on the work that I do and RefugePoint does, because right now, more than ever, we have an unprecedented crisis. It's a human crisis of people who are displaced in the world. And we not only have to think about how to respond to that as individuals, but I think right now we need to think about how to respond to that as a country and as a global community. So thank you so, so much for being here. It's such a pleasure. And I want to pause or stop there and invite you to ask any questions that you might want to ask. I find that questions can help to stimulate other thoughts and discussion. And there are microphones there if you're interested in asking any question, or you can just raise your hand and ask from the audience, and I can repeat it. So thank you very, very much.
So I'm going to ask the question that you probably get asked a lot. We're all sitting here in a comfortable, safe place. What can we do?
What can you do? Well, there's a lot of different things you can do. I mean, one is that RefugePoint, this organization, we actually have our country director, Jacob from Kenya, who oversees our programs in Kenya, and we have staff across Africa. He's here. He's sitting right over there. But we have our offices, Jacob, welcome. We have our offices in Cambridge, really close to you, in Central Square, and in Kenya, and we have staff right now across Africa and starting to expand across the world. I mean, so one really simple thing I think we've talked a little about potentially at the end of this year, if there are opportunities to give to support what RefugePoint does. That's, I think, in terms of if you want to contribute. I think another thing is that there's a lot of misinformation right now about refugees out there in the world. I just wrote an op-ed for the Boston Globe talking about the US refugee process and how it's the most secure process out of any immigration channel of people coming to the US. But I think if you want to spread some information on the internet or through your own personal just own personal connections about refugees and who they are. This morning I saw a great article in the New York Times about Syrian refugees coming to the US and about actually conservative Republicans who are reaching out to help them. But regardless of your political orientation, when we come face to face with these issues, they're human issues. And that's the thing that I think people really overlook, is that when you come face to face with this, it's about you and somebody else. And there's in that face-to-face interaction, there's kind of, it feels to me like some sort of moral responsibility to act. But we don't all have the opportunity to come face to face with people all the time. So I think spreading information, supporting us, there are a lot of other good organizations. If people are really interested in engaging and actually volunteering, there's some organizations here in the Boston area and also around the world that help refugees to integrate here. And I got my start working here in Boston with the Jewish Vocational Service and the International Rescue Committee, which were two organizations at that time who in the 90s who were actually helping refugees to integrate here. I hope that answers.
I have one specific question just for this venue and for this setting. And again, not to take anything away from what you just said, which I think we should all do, which is help out both with money and with effort. But one thing is what we actually do technically for a living, which is, communication technology, access, the fact that the whole world, everybody can now communicate with everybody. And is there some way we could focus some of that to help out the problem? Can you think of some ways that we could use either, being able to provide connectivity or access to information or access to distance education over technology? Is there some angle that we could use to take some of the stuff that Google's good at and that we're all good at technically to help with the problem?
It's a great question. So there are some new online kind of more global learning platforms. There's a new effort based out of Rwanda, which is started with an organization and university called Kepler that is trying to democratize education for refugees. So it's higher education for people who are ready to study in college. But that is certainly an area of greatest need. So President Obama, in a couple of weeks, is going to hold a refugee summit in New York. And at that refugee summit, he's going to say, among others, three things. He's going to say that we have to increase resettlement globally so that more refugees have opportunities to get to countries where they can rebuild their lives. We have to expand education opportunities because UNICEF just came out with a report that was mentioned in the New York Times this morning and yesterday, how there are 50 million kids who are impacted by war and conflict. And so many of these children have their educations cut short for years and years. And that is morally impossible as a global community to look at and not do something about. And President Obama is going to talk about the need to increase work and self-reliance opportunities for 1 million refugees around the world. So what can you do here at Google? I need to think more about that, but I think if there are ways to connect in with education opportunities that are online, I think if there are ways to connect in with employment and self-reliance opportunities that are more online, there are a lot of very innovative tech-oriented solutions that are starting to emerge that are intersecting with refugees. There's one right now that is about helping refugee children, and it's kind of creating an online platform to do that and to make sure that there are appropriate services available. So I will get back with maybe more specifics, but I think that's a great question. It's something that I think the whole Google community is so interestingly and perhaps uniquely poised to do something and to engage. I know Google also has engaged in different ways with refugees over the past year or two as well.
Okay, thanks. We'll
Thanks.
continue the conversation.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, great. I will just say a couple of closing words then. First, thank you again, Jeff, and thank you, Google, for having me here. It has been such a pleasure to be here. And I guess my primary thought, again, is that I wanted to share is that we are facing an unprecedented global crisis with 65 million people who've been displaced by violence and conflict. That's more than at any point since we've been counting in history. And the average amount of time that someone is a refugee is close to 20 years. So we need to think as a community about new ways of doing things, not just giving aid year after year after year because the international community has run out of money to do that. So how do we get people to places where they don't need aid anymore and they can become contributors? And we have such a moral obligation to do this for all those people that are in danger, but in particular for children who are impacted by these crises and just need to have normal lives with access to education and other opportunities. So thank you so much for being here. It's a real pleasure, and thank you.